Good morning. Commitment, as you know, is really hard. There came a point where probably in your life also you realize if you really wanted to pursue something, you had to go all the way for it, and that meant that you were going to compromise other things that got in the way of that. Like just a few years ago when I decided that I wanted to pursue ministry and go ahead and go back to college and finish my degree, I had to make a lot of changes in my life to make sure that I was going all of that way. I put in my notice at work, so at some point I knew that income was going to stop and I had to find something else. I didn't renew my lease, and so I didn't really have anywhere to live anymore. And I had committed to going to a university, and I was expected to show up somewhere and be present there and start basically completely over in a brand new city. And when I did that, I compromised all the other alternatives that were going to keep me from going there and committing and seeing that through all the way without knowing what the day-to-day was going to look like. I just had a direction that I wanted to go. And I was definitely scared. But that was the choice that I made to do that. And you know that commitment is like this a lot, especially in really serious things like a marriage. You know, this is the person that I've chosen to be with. And I'm turning down all the other options, or what could have been, even though you don't know what the day-to-day is like in a marriage. And this is obviously coming from my long 0 years of being married. But From what I understand on this side of filing taxes as single, never married, every single year, is that there's an intensity about the commitment of marriage. You can see how serious that actually is. And when the wedding vows are read that I've heard oftentimes and never said, they sound like this: I take you to be my lawfully wedded, my husband, my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. And you've probably remember the day that you said this. This is really easy for me to recite, but when you said this, you made a really serious commitment to somebody else. You decided, I am taking you forever, whatever it turns out to be like. Whether we're healthy, or one of us gets sick, or we both get sick. Whether fortune or poverty comes my way, I'm committed to you. Whether this is for better, which I'm assuming it is, or for worse, I have chosen to make this covenant and this commitment to you. And then the really big one, forsaking all others, till death do us part. Forsaking all others. If there was an option, if there was another choice, I'm giving that up to go this direction with you. Even if it could have possibly have been better, I've decided to let that go because I'm going on this path with you. I've made that choice from the past, and whatever could have been, I'm giving that up. And you might be thinking that, and I would totally agree with you, that I don't have the complete confidence of talking about the depth of marriage. I'm not there. I haven't been there. You have that advantage over me, actually, and you have a gift, and you're able to understand the depth of a covenant that I don't yet understand, but I can comprehend the intensity of it based on the examples that I see around me. And the intensity of a marriage, the intensity of a covenant can easily be grasped. This is my mom and dad, actually, when they just read their wedding vows. My mom's like 19 in this picture. She's way too young to be getting married. I think Dad's like 25. But on this day, they said, I'm giving up all the other options to go into covenant with you and with you alone till death do us part. And that's exactly what happened. When I was 20 years old, Mom passed, and my dad remarried to a wonderful woman, Terry, here. Terry's been really good to our family. We love Terry. And Terry had a late husband also, and after her husband passed and after Mom passed, they decided, let's do it again. Let's forsake all others till death does one of us part again. And then I have two older sisters. This is Brooke, that's on the right, and Summer, that's on the left. They looked ahead and they understood the depth, the seriousness of a marriage, and they decided to get married to relatively decent gentlemen, I guess. And they understand that this is the direction that I go. We understand how serious it is to enter into a covenant with each other. And what I've learned from these examples right here is that when you're in a relationship, you do things to honor that. You actively do things to honor the other person, to actively honor the other end of that relationship. Or you even don't do things to make sure that you are honoring that person and that relationship for the sake of each other. My dad would often always say, the marriage is always about the other person. If you can always make it about the other person, that's how it's supposed to work. And so when God communicates his covenant towards us, he often uses the image of a marriage to say, we are this much, we have this intensity of a bond with each other. I want a relationship with you. I want this covenant with you. And so you already know, we're probably going to go to the book of Hosea to describe God's image towards us through marriage. But before we get there, let's recount the building up of the covenant all the way back in Genesis. So you remember a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the image of God and mercy, we picked out that point in Genesis 3:15 where God said, you've already sinned, and I have already developed the solution to it, the seed story. You remember this? It was that big P word that I taught you, proto-evangelium. Okay, I'm glad you remember it. It's there. God said, I've developed a solution already for the sin that you committed. Already, I'm going to put it into action. And then we know that fulfillment, when God said, I'm going to bring a seed from a woman, and it's going to crush the head of the serpent. We already know the fulfillment of that was Jesus Christ on the cross. He crushed sin and death as the offspring of the woman. And that was our salvation. But God didn't just appear in those two little blips, like two events on a timeline. Here's me talking about it, and here's me fulfilling it. He was present that entire time. And in that entire time, he was actively pursuing the relationship with humanity. He actively wanted to honor that commitment with humanity. And man constantly just kept falling away from that and choosing other things except to honor that covenant with God. And so that all starts out here in Genesis chapter 12. Just a few chapters later, after God says, I've already developed a solution, this is how I'm going to put it into action. I'm going to call a man. I'm going to call Abram. Actually, and what God says to Abram when he decides to put his plan into action is this. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the people on the earth will be blessed through you. It was exactly what you were saying this morning, Seth. God wants to bless the whole earth through you, not just a little nation. The earth will be blessed through you. The background information that we have about Abram is like really limited. Just before the introduction of Genesis chapter 12 right here, we just have like a little bit of lineage of Abram. We know he's in Haran in the land of the Chaldeans, and that's all we know. And some speculate, and I don't know if I'm there, is that maybe he was also an idol worshiper just based on the region that he was in, and it makes it an even more like redemptive story because he was an idol worshiper. I don't see the evidence of there, but knowing that was present in this land is also really important to the story and to God's covenant. And that's because the second time when after Abram obeys God, God calls out to Abram a second time. And in Genesis chapter 15, this is what God says in Genesis chapter 15. 15 verse 1, it says this. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. And this is why idolatry, and this is why this right here in Genesis chapter 15 is important. In the land of idolatry, in the time when people will go out and pick out a nice piece of wood and carve a face in it and make it their god, they had to go and seek that out. They had to go and find their god. They had to go and dig up the rock that they thought that was really pretty and say, this is the rock that I have found, and I'm gonna serve a rock. They had to go and find it. But what God does is the exact opposite of all of that. And he comes and finds a man. He is the one that does the choosing and says, I am choosing you for my plan. I chose you. You didn't choose a favorite god and let it act. I chose you. The exact opposite of what pagan worship is. And so God chooses Abram, and not only does he choose him, he says, I'm your shield. I'm your great reward. Because in idolatry, you have to constantly buy the favor of that idol. You have to constantly buy the favor of that god or that goddess. If you want a plentiful crop, you have to give an offering to it to buy their favor for that one event and then continue on down the line. And you have to constantly make a bargain with them to earn their favor. And they don't remember you until the next time you have something to give them. God is different when he comes down and says, I'm choosing you. And not only that, I'm your protector. I'm your shield. And I am your reward. I'm the one that wants to be with you. You were chosen. You didn't do the choosing. And so we come up to Genesis 15, verse 5. And God says, as he did in Genesis chapter 12, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. Even though your wife's barren, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And he brings Abram outside and he says, look at the heavens. Count the stars if you can. I dare you. Try to number them. You see the number of stars up here? That's the number of descendants you're going to have. And Abram believed God, and it was righteousness. And so God says to Abram, I'm the God that chose you out of idolatry. I'm the God that chose you out of this land, and I'm going to bring you to a new place to possess it. I wanted you. And then, as the chapter moves on, God says to Abram, God chooses, I'm going to make a covenant with you. He initiates the covenant. And so God instructs Abram and says, I want you to take these 3 animals, split them in half, and take 2 birds. And then he doesn't give him any further instruction. And the day goes by, and Abram's waiting and waiting. He's chasing off the vultures that are trying to eat the carcass. And then God says this when he makes the covenant. In verse 17 of chapter 15, it says this, and it came to pass when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. And on that same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, I've given this land to your descendants, from the river of Egypt to the river of the Euphrates. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadamites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Nowhere in there was Abram instructed to pass through and make the covenant. God was on the one side of that covenant with Abram. God made the covenant, and he held to it the entire time. But this wasn't just a sudden appearance of God showing up here and then disappearing until the cross again. From this moment on, he continues to maintain the relationship with humanity, with Abram, and with the children of Israel. And he makes it clear that he wants this relationship, as you know, as we come into Exodus chapter 20, as God brings his children that he called out of Egypt to give them the land that he just promised he would give them here in Genesis. He calls them out, and in Exodus chapter 20, we have the 10 Commandments. You remember what I was saying about wanting to be honored when you're in a relationship. You do things to honor that relationship on both sides. And this is what God says. He says to the children of Israel at Mount Sinai in this covenant, I'm going to be your God, and you will be my people. We are in bond with each other. You will have no other gods. It's just going to be me and you. So if you want to honor this, you'll just have me, and I'll just have you. And among all of that, he says, you know what's going to make this even better is if you love each other, if you honor each other in this commitment and help each other in this commitment. And so the 10 Commandments, as you know, can be broken up into this is how you love God, this is how you love each other. It's all about honoring the relationship with a God that wants to be honored and in relationship with his people. And with all that, understanding how everything that happened was initiated on God's behalf, as part of his plan to give salvation, he instituted the covenant, He wanted to be honored. He wanted to give himself as a reward. He made a plan and enacted on it, and all based on a relationship with us for our own benefit. The people take this covenant and they grumble against God all the time that they're with him. They grumble against God through the wilderness. And they go back, and God calls them back to him over and over and over. And then, for God to really show what it feels like to be on his side of the marriage and to not be honored, he calls our man Hosea. And in Hosea chapter 1, verse 1 reads this: "The word of the Lord came to Hosea, the son of Berai, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, and the king of Israel." And verse 2 says this: "When the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, 'Go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry, departing from the Lord.'" It's never easy when God calls a man to do something. He calls Abram, and he's like, "I want you to abandon everything, your family, your land, and I'm going to take you somewhere. Hosea, what I want you to do is I want you to go and marry a prostitute, because I'm going to show you what it's like to be married to the nation that I chose to join into relationship with." And so all this imagery right here, he says, it's like I pulled you from being a prostitute, and I wanted this commitment to you. I wanted this marriage to you, and it was just going to be us, and I had the best things to give you. I had the better things to give you. But it's like once I gave that to you, you threw it all away. Because as Hosea goes on, Hosea's wife that he brought out of prostitution and had kids with, she decides, I would much rather just go back to being a prostitute. Even though we're in this marriage, I'll chase other lovers instead, because that's what I preferred. And God says, that's what you did to me. After I gave you the land, you went right back to the other gods. You took what I gave you and said, thank you, Baal, Diana, Beelzebub. So what should he do? What should God do in a time when he entered into a deep covenant and he was the only one maintaining that half of the desire, that half of the agreement, his portion? I can tell you probably how I would feel and what I would do, much like you, if your partner in your marriage decided, well, this has been great and I'm committed to you, but I think I want to go chase other lovers. I think I want to go be with another person or other people. How I would feel and how maybe you might feel is like, okay, let's sever this connection, and I want nothing to do with whatever you're doing. I want nothing to do with you anymore. And that's the direction that God seems to start going. And he says this. He says, I'm going to punish you for the Baals. You burned incense to them. You decked yourself. You gave yourself the jewelry. You made yourself look really good to all the idols, to all the false gods. The things that I pulled you away from, you made yourself look really good to them again. And you forgot me. You just completely disregarded me. And when Israel decided that they would rather have the other gods, God gives them over to that. He says, if you want something besides me and I have the best thing to give you, I can't make you want me. I'll just give you over to what that is. But it's never going to satisfy to the depth that I can satisfy. And that's why I chose you, and that's why you have the biggest benefit. And then after he says this, he says, I know what's going on, and I gave you over to that, and you forgot me. He says, look, I'm going to allure you, and I'm going to bring her. I'm going to bring you into the desert. And then he says this after that. I'm going to get you alone, and I'm going to speak tenderly to her. And from there, I will give you vineyards. In what relationship, when you've been cheated on, when you've been disrespected, when you've had your face spit in, that you go to that person that's cheated you? God goes to them and says, I'm going to speak tenderly to you. And I'm going to give you a vineyard. I'm still going to show you I have the best things to offer. I have the better things to offer. Only a God that wants a relationship with his people, after being disrespected this long, will still call his people back and say, remember that marriage that we had? Remember that covenant we had? I still want that with you. I still want you. How much more evidence do you need in all of this to see that God is the one that initiated the covenant for our betterment, on our behalf, for us? How much more do you have to see that God is pursuing you and wants you, whether you've known him or not? He says this in Hosea 2:16-17, on that day, a declaration of God, you will call me my husband. I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, and they will no longer be mentioned by their name. I'll make you forget all of that. And I will take you as my wife forever. I will take you as my wife for myself in righteousness and in justice and steadfast love and mercy. I will take you as my wife in faithfulness, and you will know Yahweh. You will know God. I want you back even after all of that. Humanity is constantly breaking their covenant to God, their commitment to God. And God is constantly saying, whatever you're trying to replace me with, let it go. Because I want you, and I have the best things for you. I will give you over to those empty substitutions. But when they don't satisfy, if you really want something more than me, you can have it. But I will also continue to call you back. How many times do you prostitute yourself? How many times will God call you back? How many times do you trade in the best thing that God has to offer to something that's nothing more than a piece of wood that you found? And so God calls Hosea again. And he says, you know what? It's going to look like this when I call you back. As I'm calling you back, it looks like this. Go and marry her again. She left you. Go buy her back. Go redeem her. And so Hosea goes and buys her, and he pays way too much for her. He redeems her. And then he goes into the covenant again, and he says, it's just me and you. I've paid everything for you so that you will be mine alone. And I'm going to be yours alone. I redeemed you, and I want it to just be us. Honor this relationship. And so when God finally shows what this looks like, it's in the Gospels. In Matthew 26, we reviewed this just a few weeks ago again. We have the institution of the Lord's Supper. And Jesus is holding the cup, and he says in Matthew 26, 27-28, after giving thanks, he took the cup and he gave it to them and said, drink from it, all of you. This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Once again, God says, make the covenant with me. Nobody went to Jesus and said, Lord, make the covenant with us. We want the bond with you. God chose to make the covenant again. Said, this will be the bond between us. Go into covenant with me. And then right after that, he says this, but I tell you, from now on, I will never drink the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new with you in the kingdom of my Father. So once again, it doesn't stop right there. The covenant doesn't stop there. He's like, I want to maintain this relationship, and we're going somewhere. I'll partake of this with you again with my Father in that kingdom. And I want you to be there. Maintain this relationship with me, because I have come all this way and I've honored it all this time, and I've constantly called you back to me because I want you, and God wants you. He came all of this way, said, make a covenant with me, be in marriage with me, forsake all others to be with me. And when he says this, I'll drink it with you, it's a promise. I have something to give you. We're going somewhere still in this relationship with my kingdom, with my Father, in that kingdom. I'll be there. And I won't be there because of anything that I've done. I won't be there because I'm just so good at honoring my commitment to God. I'm not going to be there because of my merit or anything that I could have done. I'm going to be there because God constantly honored the relationship with me and calls me back to him. He chose me first, and he chose you on that cross. And he wants that relationship with you. Not only that, but he gave us his Holy Spirit and put it inside us to constantly call us back to him. And he wants to honor the relationship just as much as he wants us to honor that relationship with him. Our understanding of this kind of a relationship only comes because he placed that desire within us at the very beginning. When God made us in his image, he said, I'm going to make you understand what it's like to want relationship. And then constantly pursues it and wants us to constantly pursue it. And even at the end of Matthew, at the Great Commission, once again, he doesn't leave it there. He says, I'm with you always to the end of the age. I'll always be there. I'm not absent. I'm always a part of that covenant. And today, right now, God is saying the same thing to you. I want to make a covenant with you. I have made a covenant with you. And it's time to leave your other lovers and come back to me. If you're new to hearing this information, ask away. Ask all of the questions. We love talking about this. This is the best thing that we have. This right here is the best thing that we have. And I feel pretty confident being able to speak on behalf of the family that whatever you took away, if you took away the house, if you took away the car, whatever it is, this is still the very best thing that we have. And this makes us who we are. A God that chose us. We didn't choose. He chose us. If you're ready to leave the idols, whatever they are, and be joined to God, he wants you. And he's calling you. Enter into that covenant with him. Now is that time. Thank you for your attention.